Thank you very much, SecGen. All right, so we're going to talk about Afghanistan because
yeah, now
there's been some...
you're just dripping. Yeah, yeah, you can feel it coming. Yeah.
I think we have some.
Sorry, everyone. Let's talk about Afghanistan. With the moves towards a potential reduction in violence, if all goes well, possibly even a peace deal, this means that the U.S. will pull out troops. That is likely followed by a withdrawal also of NATO troops, right? Troops from NATO allies. But my question is, if we need to monitor what's happening on the ground, if these withdrawals, at least on the NATO side, are conditions-based, but you're no longer there, who's monitoring the far-flung provinces? How do we know if the Taliban is respecting these deals? And over the course of this war, the longest in NATO history, you've now got ISIS as a complicating factor. What are you going to do about that? With fewer troops, all I see is these groups rejoicing that you're going to be gone.
So first of all, I think we understand that we are not leaving Afghanistan and we don't have a deal, but we are closer to a deal. And what we have said, NATO has said, the US has said, is that we are prepared to adjust our presence if Taliban demonstrates real will and capability to reduce violence. And of course, we are in Afghanistan to create the conditions for peace. The aim is not to stay in Afghanistan as long as possible. The aim for our presence in Afghanistan is to send a message to Taliban that they will never win on the battlefield, but they have to sit down and make real compromises around the negotiating table. The only lasting solution to the crisis conflict in Afghanistan is an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process. So actually, one of the main goals we have now is to try to initiate, to facilitate a start of Afghan talks, Afghan negotiations. But again, we have said that everything we do in Afghanistan will be conditions-based. We will only reduce our presence if we see that Taliban is really able and willing to deliver, and then we will do it step by step. Let me also briefly add that, of course, the US is talking with the Taliban, but the US is consulting closely with all NATO allies. We have 16,000 troops there, many of which are non-US troops. And of course, this is also about NATO adjusting our troop levels in Afghanistan if there is a deal.
But at the moment, the Taliban controls roughly half of the territory. How does that look like victory?
No, but this is about finding a compromise. I mean, I think we all have to understand that we have been longer in Afghanistan than we expected when we went in. Also, I was Prime Minister in Norway in 2001 when they made the first decisions to send Norwegian troops to Afghanistan. And if anyone had told me in 2001 that we were going to be there now, I would say that's out of question, impossible. But we are still in Afghanistan. So we need to find a way that we can, in a responsible way, reduce our presence in Afghanistan, make sure that Afghanistan doesn't become a safe haven for international terrorists. And the best way to do that is to train the Afghan forces, build local capacity so they can take full responsibility for their own country. And that's exactly what we're doing. NATO is not in a combat mission anymore, but we are training the Afghans so they can be able to stabilize their own country and have the strength to make real deals with the Taliban.
Secretary General, I wanted to pick up on something you said about the transatlantic bond. You appear to have succeeded where your European peers are struggling a little bit. I mean, President Macron, who is speaking here shortly, has tried everything ranging from a candlelight dinner at top of the Eiffel Tower to the famous white-knuckle handshake. But you seem to be the only leader who has elicited positive feedback from the President of the United States, including on Twitter. I mean, this is sort of, is this a lesson that you can give to your fellow leaders about preserving and sort of improving the transatlantic bond?
Well, also, I believe in the strength of North America and Europe working together. And we have been extremely successful. And we deliver a lot when we are able to stand together. Then, of course, I'm not naive. And I'm reading newspapers, so I've seen that there are some disagreements between us. We are 29 different allies from both sides of the Atlantic with different political parties in government, and there are differences. There's no way to deny that. But my message is that partly that we have seen differences before, dating back to the Suez Crisis in 1956, all the way to the Iraq War in 2003. And we have seen that also the differences we have today, we have been able to deal with them when it comes to what we do on the security and defense arena. Because the reality is that despite the disagreements we see on trade and climate change, and these are serious disagreements, actually the United States is now delivering more when it comes to European security. More troops, more investments, more exercises, and European allies are standing up. So I'm not saying that climate change, trade, and the other differences we see are not important. I'm only saying that the history of NATO is that we have been able to overcome these differences again and again, because we see the importance of uniting around our core task to protect and defend each other. And we actually make some progress, for instance, in the fight against Daesh, ISIS.
So would you say Article 5 is still the deterrent that it used to be? Because we've heard some very serious criticism from within, from some of the top allies.
So, Article 5 is the core of NATO. And of course, the importance of Article 5 is to deter conflict. NATO's task is not to fight the war, but to prevent the war. And the best way of doing that is by sending a clear message to any potential adversary that if one ally is attacked, the whole NATO will respond. And by doing so, we have been able to preserve peace for more than 70 years. So as long as this collective defense clause is credible, then we are safe, there will be no conflict. And then I think, the United States and European allies are committed to Article 5 as a treaty obligation, but not only in words, but also in deeds. For me, it's hard to imagine a stronger commitment to Article 5 by North America, actually US and Canada, than the fact that they have increased their military presence in Europe. Just as we speak, we have Defend the Europe 20, where we have 20,000 US troops deployed from the United States to Europe, the largest number of US troops deployed in any European exercise for decades. For me, it's hard to imagine a stronger commitment to Article 5 than more troops. And let me add to that for the first time in our history, we have combat-ready troops in the eastern part of the lines, the battle groups in Poland and the Baltic countries. They are sending a very clear message that NATO is already there. So again, for me, that's a clear demonstration of commitment to Article 5.
So we're running really, really tight on time, but if someone would like to ask a question from the audience, otherwise there's a guy jumping to his feet in the back. Sir, if you could introduce yourself and give us a very quick question, because we're going to...
Perhaps can someone give him a microphone?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm François Hesbourg. My question to Jens Stoltenberg is the following. You mentioned China as a challenge and an opportunity. What role can NATO play in helping avoid a rift between the US and Europe in the manner in which to approach China? We already see today that there is a policy push by the United States on the 5G business. Europe is divided about how to respond. What can NATO do to avoid the China factor over the next decades becoming the wedge issue between the US and Europe?
So what we can do is that we can bring Europe and North America together and to address and discuss the implications of the rise of China and how NATO should make sure that we also are united in dealing with those challenges. And that's exactly, for the first time in NATO's history, we are now addressing China. It was at our leaders' meeting in London, we had a statement, and the NATO leaders agreed that we need now to address, to better understand the consequences of the rise of China. There are some opportunities, but also many challenges. And I met with the Chinese foreign minister yesterday, and of course, I stated clearly that NATO is an alliance based on some core values: democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and of course we don't always look eye to eye on all issues with China, but I believe in dialogue with China, and I believe in the importance of talking to them on issues like the Middle East, Afghanistan, arms control, and many other issues. And then we also have, both in the European Union and NATO, developed, I would say, guidelines or basic requirements for instance, investment in infrastructure, including telecommunication 5G. So I'm not saying that we have solved it, that everything is coordinated, but NATO is the only platform that brings together North America and Europe on a daily basis to address also a wide range of challenges, including the challenges posed by the rise of China. So use NATO as that platform, and then we will be able to develop more common responses.
Mr. Secretary General, I'd like to bring in a question from our audience, from Hanna Neumann from the European Parliament, and I know this is something dear to your heart. She asks, how will you ensure that any deal in Afghanistan will continue to promote women's rights? This is something that you care about so deeply. It's something that has been one of NATO's stated goals, and I mean, we can argue whether that's going so well at the moment, but if you leave, who's going to be there to continue these programs? Who's going to protect the people who are continuing the programs?
Well, so first of all, we have not decided to leave Afghanistan. What we have decided is to be ready to adjust our force level if Taliban delivers and demonstrate their will and capability to reduce violence. Second, I think that one of the great achievements we have also helped to take place in Afghanistan over these years is to strengthen the role of women in Afghanistan. Many more girls, women have education, and we have empowered women. They are much stronger now than they were in 2001. Thirdly, at some stage, the Afghans have to be in charge fully of their own future. And this is the message from the Afghans. I met with President Ghani yesterday. Of course, at some stage, it has to be an Afghan-owned peace process. And therefore we need to find this balance between supporting, helping them, but also at some stage enabling them to fully be in charge of their own future. We will do whatever we can to make sure that the gains we made, for instance, when it comes to education, women's rights, are preserved. But at the same time, we have to try to find a lasting, negotiated, peaceful solution, and we'll do that step by step, conditions-based. So we make sure that we do whatever we can to preserve the gains we have made.
Secretary, thank you very much for your time. I know you need to rush. That was wonderful. We are now expecting Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to come after you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we stay?
Yeah, will they put the teleprompter?